who is joining us. We are going to give just one more minute until more people can join us, and then we will get started with the webinar. In the meantime, while I allow for other people to join, please feel free to add your name and country in the chat so that we know who you are. And also please be mindful of sending the message to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your message and we have a better idea of who is joining us for this webinar from around the world. Thank you. We will begin shortly. For everyone who is joining us, we are just giving one more minute for others to join us on the webinar, and then we will get started. Please do add your name and country in the chat so that we all know who you are. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Some people are still joining us, but we are going to begin to make sure we have enough time. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Stenka Piskulic, and I'm the co-chair of the Conservation Finance Alliance's Environmental Funds Working Group. And I'm also the president of REDLAC, which is the Latin American and Caribbean Network of Environmental Funds. I'm very happy to be hosting this webinar. And this webinar is a part of a series of webinars that we have been doing throughout this year. And the purpose of these webinars is to provide more information on the conservation practice standards, both for those who have already been using these standards and who want to learn about what's new in the 2020 edition, but also for all of you who want to start learning about these standards as well and who want to start using them as well. So this is a learning opportunity for all of us, and especially an opportunity to ground these standards into actual practice that is happening in the field and to understand how different conservation trust funds are actually applying them in their day-to-day work. So this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to the 2021 REDLAC Congress. This Congress will be happening from the 28th to the 30th of September. It will be a virtual Congress, and many of the topics that we will be discussing here today will also be discussed during this Congress. So it's also an opportunity for all of you to join us for the REDLAC Congress, to please save the date, put it in your calendar, and join us for this occasion. We had large, over 90 countries, representatives from 90 countries joining us last year. So hopefully it's an opportunity to exchange information as well. So for today we are going to be hearing about asset management practice standards. And that definitely is a topic that we are all very interested in learning about. It is very related to the work that we do as conservation trust funds. How do we actually manage the funds that we have? So first of all, I would like to introduce our panelists. I would first like to introduce Viviana Lujan. She's an environmental lawyer, a consultant, and also co-author of the Practice Standards Update. She will be giving an introduction of the asset management practice standards to give us some context and prepare us for the discussion. We will then hear from Natalia Arango from Fondo Acción, who will be presenting a case study showcasing the best practices in asset management in the region. And finally, we will also listen from Eddie Adra, who is the CFO at Coast Funds in Canada. And he will delve into their Indigenous-based investment strategy, which has strong social and environmental values. So thank you to the three panelists who are joining us today. Each one of them will be giving us a 10-minute presentation. And at the end of the three presentations, we will have a chance to discuss with them. We'll have half an hour to do that. And so please feel free to add your questions and answers in the questions and answers section so that we can go back and answer your questions as well and discuss with the three panelists. So with that, I would like to first welcome Viviana Lujan and ask her to give her presentation. Viviana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Zdenka. Bear with me a sec while I'll put on the presentation. Is it visible, Zdenka? Just to check. Yes, great. Well, thanks, Zdenka, for the introduction, and of course, CFA and Red Lab for the invitation to present at this webinar. As Zdenka already mentioned, I will talk about mainly the updates on the 2020 practice standards for CTFs on asset management. As Zdenka mentioned, I think this and resource mobilization are probably at the center of the heart of the role of CTFs as it gets to the role of ensuring financial resilience for conservation. So very, very thrilled to be able to be on this panel today. Before I start talking about the updates to the standards, I thought it would be good to give you a little bit of context of the place in time and in development where these standards and asset management were updated. As you may know, we worked, Wolf's Company and Aligning Visions concurrently also on the 10-year review of conservation trust funds, which was a very data-driven report. Amongst others, we conducted a survey with 50 CTFs worldwide. And for this specific topic on asset management, we also incorporated the results of the multi-year CTIS, the investment survey. So when we talk about investment management for CTFs, we need to understand that governing bodies, board members, trustees, however you call it on your different jurisdictions, basically have a very difficult task. They need to preserve endowment capital in order to protect future earning streams. But at the same time, they also need to ensure that the distributions that are made today are maximized for today's pressing conservation needs. So as you can see from this picture, there are certain trade-offs they need to balance with between stable spending and also investing in a market that might deliver volatile returns, and what I just mentioned on preserving capital and maximizing distribution. And the asset management standards say that governing bodies and their committees overseeing investment need to invest and manage as a prudent investor would invest his or her own funds. But it is difficult, of course, to understand what is a prudent investor would do when you need to try to balance these trade-offs between preserving capital and trying to maximize distributions and playing with risk and returns. And of course, there are many strategies to work on this, like asset diversification, use of qualified investment professionals, adopting and sticking, very important, sticking to a long-term strategy, building internal capacity for investments. And these are all tools that help the CTFs fulfill their mandate of being prudent investors and managing risks. But the CTIS multi-year study have concluded that for many CTFs, actually, the returns on these investments are not meeting the expectations. And when we talk about expectations, we talk about at least a 3% spend per year, which is typically what CTFs have set them to spend between 3 and 4%. So the CTIS multi-year study made an analysis on a fictitious 10 million portfolio that was invested between 2006 when the report started, when the survey started, and 2018. And for this, they took 4 different portfolios, basically a benchmark composite comprised of 60% equities and 40% bonds, Another benchmark composite comprised of 50% global equities and 45% global bonds and 5 cash. And then the median CTF endowment on the data set of the CTFs that was analyzed, and the 75 percentile CTF endowment. And what the results of these CTIS multi-year studies show is that on this analysis, basically these two portfolios, which are the actual CTFs, none of them met the 3% estimated or targeted distributions. And what's even worse, after 13 years, these CTFs had actually lost value in real terms on their capital endowments because the investment strategies did not allow them to catch up with inflation. Whereas these two benchmark portfolios would have both achieved the targeted distributions and the targeted spend of 3% per year. And this is very complicated data and an oversimplification what I'm explaining. So if you're interested in delving into detail on this, I invite you to look into the 10-year review. But I just wanted to set the stage about why investment management is so important for CTFs and why the practice standards on asset management are so relevant. The 10-year review also looked into trends developments for asset management. For example, as you may all know, there has been increased pressure on investment professionals to comply with all kinds of compliance regulations like anti-money laundering, know your client, counter-finance of terrorism, bribery, etc. And this may have fee implications also for the CTFs when engaging investment professionals. Related to this, especially for small CTFs, engaging investment management services can be quite expensive, especially if you have a very small endowment. So what happens is that we saw in our analysis in the report that more and more CTFs are pulling the investment management services. And this serves different purposes, so not only from a cost perspective, but also having a larger pool of assets to be managed can give CTFs better access to better ranked investment professionals, better asset classes, as well as other services like insurance, etc. So this is definitely a trend to watch for in the future. And another important one, which is I think what brings us the most today, the focus on sustainable and responsible investment, is a trend that has been developing, I think, over the past 10, 15 years. But there was still some skepticism until last year whether sustainable responsible investment or ESG investment was actually too risky. And last year, during COVID, it was actually proven that ESG investing or SRI investing actually works as a hedging strategy. And the first quarter of 2020 saw a surge in ESG investment that actually was almost as much flow as the whole 2019. And this led to a big body of research, which has been backed by the large investment managers, basically saying, yes, ESG investing could be as or even more profitable as mainstream investment. And it is actually a strategy for long-term risk management. So within this context, we looked at the asset management standards. I must say that this is probably the set of standards that got the least revisions of the whole standards, because they were very well crafted and discussed in the original version, and the updates mainly reflect lessons learned and some emphasis that the people participating in the review thought was necessary. So the contents kept more or less the same, focusing on investment strategy, which is reflected in the policies and guidelines, the fiduciary duties and capital preservation objectives, which I already talked a little bit about, the expertise, roles and responsibilities that the governing bodies and committees need to have in the middle to be able to perform the asset management duties, and also how to engage investment professionals and how to engage with investment professionals. So both of them are important, how you enter into contracts, how you tender for them, etc. And last but not least, this new standard on mission alignment of investments, which we're just going to talk about. So this reflects this update, these trends that are seen in the market, but also the fact that CTFs are already engaging in this process of aligning their investments with their mission. And more CTFs have said that they want to do that as well. So the asset says that CTFs need to recognize the importance of investing their portfolios consistent with their own mission and values, and also implement an appropriate strategy for this. The standard talks about how this alignment can increase the impact of CTFs by investing only in what is very close to their values and goals, and how it can mitigate return risks. CTFs are to select the appropriate mission strategy or approaches that they want to implement. I'm gonna mention what they mainly are in a minute. And very important, they need to select what are the investment criteria for alignment. And this selection of investment criteria is something that needs to relate to the mission and goals of the CTF, and not to the particular beliefs or thoughts of the members of the governing bodies or the investment committee. Once this all has been done, the strategy is in place and implemented, it will be very important that CTFs also ensure that the implementation of the strategy is monitored and reported on by the investment professionals or the in-house investment team, to make sure that the strategy is actually bearing fruit and is implemented accordingly. And this will have to be also part of the investment performance reviews with the investment professionals that are advising the CTFs. And there's some more practical considerations in the standard that are good to understand when you go through that. So what are the strategies that CTFs can consider for mission alignment? I try to split them in two groups here. So the first four are mainly more passive strategies that CTFs can implement, and usually they could be implemented through their investment professionals. So they relate mainly to defining either positive lists or negative lists of sectors or companies the CTF want or do not want to invest, based on either the performance, their type of activities, or, for example, the compliance with certain international adopted norms like human rights conventions or indigenous conventions, or other social or environmental laws. As I said, this could be mainly passed on as an obligation for the investment advisor to investment professional to implement. And I think a lot of CTFs already may have negative screening lists, either in their constitutive documents or in the best investment strategies. The second list here on the right requires a most active participation, engagement, and sophistication by the CTF that wants to implement the strategies. For example, if we talk about sustainability-themed investing, you might start already thinking about actively investing in green bonds, blue bonds, sustainable bonds, impact bonds. So that needs a certain level of understanding of the risk and also the returns that these particular products might do, and it will require an active investment by the CTF on these products. If we talk about impact investing, a CTF will need to first analyze whether it is able to do this type of investing, basically investing with impact, but also to generate a return, and design a separate strategy for this and have a specific team in-house managing these investments, or entering into contracts with specific vehicles that would implement these investments for them. And corporate engagement and shareholder action is mainly a way of managing the investment portfolio in such a way that voting rights are exercised to pursue certain social or environmental objectives. And my final slides, Lenka, I see you're on the screen. Other key updates on these standards are mainly the introduction of relative and absolute benchmarks as a way to measure performance of investments. And also related to performance, there's also more emphasis on how to engage with investment professionals for monitoring and reporting on investment performance. And finally, related to returns and managing risk and balancing returns, there's also emphasis on defining risk tolerance in investment strategies to make sure that the investment strategies really reflect what CTFs want to achieve in terms of returns, and they really think through what's the type of portfolio composition they want to achieve. And with that, I will leave you to hopefully a bit more lively presentations from the next two case studies. Thanks, Lenka.
Thank you so much, Viviana, for that wonderful overview on the work that the conservation standards have been developing. Now, let's move on to specific case studies and how this work has been done. And the first case study that we will be showcasing is from Fondo Acción, and Natalia Arango, who's the Executive Director of Fondo Acción, will be presenting this case study and showcasing some of the best practices in asset management in the region. So Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zdenka, and thank you, CFA and REDLAC, for inviting me to show a bit of our experience with the topic. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I'm assuming you can see my screen. Fondo Acción, we're based in Colombia. We're a conservation trust fund. We've been working for the last 20, almost 21 years now, investing in environment and childhood. And I'm gonna go back just to a definition of CTFs because it pertains to what we're gonna discuss, at least I'm gonna cover in this presentation. We are a mission-oriented financing institution with different financing mechanisms, and we look to channel global and national funding for local conservation efforts. But this mission-oriented is a key part of this definition. We started in 2019 our road to what I call sustainable investment portfolio. And we talked about this in a previous CFA webinar, REDLAC webinar. I'm not going to go into details, but referring a little bit to what just Viviana described, this has been our road, the steps we have taken. We started in 2019 with a negative screening that's done. And then we moved into the environmental and social governance integration, the ESG criteria. Although we're not 100% there, we're basically done. And then the next two steps we're working on, and it's work in progress, both in mission-aligned investment and impact investment. The description of our process can be you can look at the information in more detail if you're interested. I'll be happy to share our case study. And I'm just going back again to what Viviana mentioned, because these three standards of the new version of the practice standards are particularly interesting for this topic. First, our asset management and how we work with investment professionals. Then their and our engagement in periodic reviews and permanent conversations regarding portfolio. And then this last one that refers specifically to investing in assets that are consistent and coherent with the organization mission. This is the new standard in this 2020 version. So what happened with Fondo Acción in this case study is going to concentrate on the transition of a more traditional portfolio that we had in 2018, 2019 into an ESG oriented portfolio with mission-related investments. And this is just a general description of where we started on our more traditional portfolio, and then how we we moved the portfolio, increasing ESG exposure, based, of course, on the advice and the tools that our asset manager, JP Morgan, has provided during these 2 years. And this is a description of how it has evolved. So in June 2019, we had mainly non-ESG tools and vehicles. And then, I don't know if you see my pointer, but a year after, we had made interesting progress, rating now on a ESG rating A for environmental, social, and governance criteria. And now you can see the evolution of our portfolio to May of this year, with basically most of our investments based on ESG criteria and a little remaining in non-GSG. This is, of course, because of the dynamics that are natural in this transition. Not all investments can be moved into ESG-oriented investments at the same time. Based on this experience, I would like to share my insight on what has been very good for us and what has worked very well in this process of moving our portfolio to a sustainable portfolio. First of all, you or the organizations you represent as asset owners, it works very well if you have a very clear investment policy. That investment policy is the roadmap, is for you, for your asset manager, for your advisors. And it has to clearly state your intentions, your purposes, and your decisions to have them orient you in this transition or in this administration in a sustainable portfolio. But it's not only enough to have an investment policy. You have to have clear communication regarding your goals and decisions. I was talking with our team at JP Morgan last week, and they reinforced the fact that it was very useful to have the asset owner clearly state the goals and decisions they want them to pursue with the asset management. And the third thing that I would say is key is have your governance body on board. And this, I'm going to go back when I go into some of the barriers, but it's key that you as an asset or as the head of a CTF, for example, or as the head of an institution that wants to go into this trend or follow the trend of sustainable investment and mission-oriented investment, you have your board as your main support for these decisions, because they're not necessarily easy. On the side of the asset manager, they must have sustainable investment capacity and interest. It's key that the people that work with you have the tools, have the capacity, and have the strategies to support you in your interest of having sustainable investments and mission-oriented portfolios. But nothing works if you don't communicate permanently. There has to be a permanent and fluid working interaction between the executive bodies of the institution and the asset manager or advisors. Maybe you're thinking, how do you choose mission-aligned investments? Again, I'm going back to have a clear mission statement, and that's why I brought it up in my second slide. It's key that you have clearly identified your mission, because from there you can then orient the selection of the type of investments that you want. Of course, you have to have a trustworthy financial advisor like we do, and we have to make sure that your advisor has a thorough due diligence process, because as in many things, there's a lot of greenwashing going on. So you need to have a strong team that is able to identify true mission-aligned ESG oriented investments, and that has to be done through a thorough due diligence process. Of course, you need to work with well-known stringent metrics. There's a lot out there, like Hector was asking a while ago on the Q&A. So you need to work with those indexes and metrics that are most well-known in the environment. And my last advice is be patient. Not everything is available at any time. So when in this process of divesting and investing that we have gone through, it has been key to be patient. And as I told you before, we're not done yet because we don't have 100% of our assets in mission-oriented investments because they are not 100% available at any time. So you need to be patient with this process. And then just as an example, how to orient your mission-aligned investments. It's key, for example, to have references like the Sustainable Development Goals. In our case, we work and we're interested in climate-related investments. We're interested in water. We're interested in sustainable production and consumption, but also in gender equality, reducing poverty. Despite the fact that these are more policy-oriented standards, they are very key for decisions regarding your investments. And one kind of mission-oriented investments that we have at Fondo Acción are impact investments. And this understood as investments where you not only are seeking a financial return, but also a social and environmental return. We operate our own impact investment fund, which is called FIMI, where we support small enterprises in Colombia that bring social and environmental returns. But we also, as part of the portfolio and managed by JP Morgan, we have investments in other impact investment funds, such as Elevar Equity, Bain Capital, Global Impact Fund. And we look at investments in climate smart solutions, increasing connectivity for education, well-being, health are some of the examples of the investments of these investment funds. Now, what are the barriers? And Viviana mentioned them in her talk. First is what I call the sustainability performance trade-off. The belief that if you move into sustainable investments, you're either going to sacrifice return or increase risks. And how she already mentioned, this has been demonstrated to be a false trade-off. What we see here, for example, is that the returns of ESG equity has been slightly better than more traditional investments. A second set of barriers, I would say, is having limited capacity in-house knowledge. And that was probably the case of Fondo Acción. We went into this adventure not having an in-house capacity. Of course, we had the support of our JP Morgan team. That's why, and I was leading this process, and I am a conservationist and a biologist. But I was able to lead the team in this process because I worked very well with our investment advisors. And just from your side, if you are a CTF or you are a foundation that is interested in this process, I found out there were no stupid questions. I was very self-conscious at first, but I realized it was important to ask all questions. All questions are important for you to gain confidence. And you do have to trust your index because you might not have the internal capacity, but you know where you want to go based on your mission and on your organizational values. And of course, learning from others is key, not only working with your asset managers, but there are communities out there that are very good to build this to gain confidence, to make these decisions, changing the portfolio or orienting the portfolio in a new direction. Takes making difficult decisions. It's key to have the support of your board, like I mentioned, and we did that, and we have the full support and endorsement of our board. But connecting with community of practice, CFA, and others that are out there was very, very useful for us at Fondo Acción. I remember key conversations like that one I had with the Sierra Club in their process of moving towards sustainable financing. So the in-house knowledge barrier can also be easily overcome. What are the benefits? There are many benefits. What we have experienced is we're very proud of our institutional coherence now. We've moved most of our assets and our investments to sustainable investments, and that is something that we want to share, and it has been good in the environment in Colombia as well. Reputation-wise, well, I don't think I have to elaborate on that, but it has been a great team motivator inside in Fondo Acción. So it makes the team proud to know that we have made this change and have moved our assets towards sustainable financing. As we've been saying, return on investments have been very good, and you're also doing good. So you're not only doing good with the grants and things to do, but you're also doing good with your investments. Now there are costs, and I want to just talk about one, which is the fee factor. As you can see on the right-hand side, if you have a more traditional investment portfolio, you have lower fees. For example, in this example of a balanced strategic allocation portfolio, you have, for a traditional low cost, fees around 0.1% compared to fees around 0.43%. And this, of course, can make you a bit less competitive. For example, we were recently in a bidding process to operate an endowment, and our fees were higher. And so you need to consider this, because it will show up at moments that you need to compare your operation with other out there in the ecosystem. I think that's all I wanted to share with you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Natalia. That was really enlightening, and I really like your focus on mission alignment having to be at all levels, from your governance board all the way to the communities that you work with, and the fact that it's very much aligned to your organizational values, and learning from others, learning not only the finance sector, learning from the communities themselves. And I think those messages really resonate with many of us, and are a good segue to our next presentation, because we'll be hearing from Eddie Adra, who's Chief Financial Officer at Coast Funds in Canada. And he will be speaking about their Indigenous-based investment strategy, which has strong social and environmental values. So I think it's a very good complement also, Natalia, to what you just presented. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to Eddie for his presentation. And everyone, please feel free to include your questions in the questions and answers box. We already have a few there, so I encourage the panelists to read through some of those questions as we prepare for the next section. And Eddie, the floor is yours now. Thank you. Hello, do we have Eddie?
Of course, the first item on a Zoom bingo is, can you hear me? Can you see me? I apologize, I was on mute. Wanted to first start by thanking you, Zdenka, for moderating this, and Natalia and Viviana for your insightful presentations. Already learned tremendously from both of your presentations, and just humbled to be here with you. Here we go. My name is Eddie Adra. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Coast Funds, and I'm really excited to be here with you to talk about Coast Funds' journey to investing according to our values. I'll start my presentation by giving you a very brief overview of Coast Funds, and then I'll jump right away into our journey. And then if we have some time, I'll also walk you through a few examples the impact of our investment decisions have had in 2020. And so Coast Funds was created in 2008 to make a vital connection between strengthening First Nations well-being and their stewardship efforts in perpetuity. And Coast Funds' vision is that First Nations exercise their inherent rights to self-determination, ensuring healthy and thriving communities and ecosystems. And so we work in service of 27 First Nations along the Great Bear Rainforest and Hawaii. That really is in the Pacific North Coast of British Columbia. And you can see really spread out throughout the whole west coast of British Columbia. And these are the emblems of the 27 First Nations we're proud to work with on a day-to-day basis. Coast Funds is made of two funds, the Conservation Endowment Fund, worth about $88 million, and the Economic Sinking Fund, worth about $25 million, for a total asset under management of $113 million as of December 2020. Okay, let's now shift to our journey through our Indigenous-led investment strategy. Over the next few slides, I'll walk you through Coast Fund's journey from 2008 all the way to where we are today, going through divestment, diversification, social ROI, impact, accountability, and then finally going through driving change in the corporate governance sector. But before I do that, and it seems like both Viviana and Natalia went through the same idea and had the same concept working through their presentation. And it's such an important concept to try to break because the critics in our virtual room, and the big question that's often raised when thinking about whether impact investment or value-based investing is, do impact investing and value-based investing reduce economic returns? And since inceptions, Coast Funds investment returns have consistently surpassed our portfolio benchmarks. And as you can see on the slide, we've managed to do that year to year, for the exception of 1 year included here. There are many studies that affirm this principle, and obviously we have the data to support this here. And my the previous two colleagues did an amazing job presenting this as well. So I think now that we've addressed the elephant in the room as to whether value-based investing would reduce your investment return and your ability to maximize your grants, let's go through Coast Fund's journey. So in 2008, when we were created, we started off with a fairly standard asset mix and a portfolio that's very consistent with other funds and foundations that would have been around that time, a mix of fixed income, global and Canadian equities. And then our first step in our journey was divestment of harmful industries. The harmful industries divested from were directed by Indigenous values, resulting in divestment from industries such as tar sand miners and extractors, companies like Enbridge, industries like the military weapons, tobacco, nuclear power, and gambling products and services. While divestment was an important step, it wasn't enough. Divestment didn't add value to the investment chain by rewarding positive change. As Coast Funds evolved, so did our portfolio. And the next step really was to further diversify our portfolio to maximize economic return, achieving the purpose of what we're doing while not compromising our values. And so through this process, we expanded our portfolio. But unfortunately, we learned that while we focused on environmental, social, and governance matters, ESG did not address one of our core values, which was Indigenous rights. And so through our diversification process, we were successful in identifying opportunities to address our core values of Indigenous rights. And this is where we started investing for impact. This is a bit different than what we talked about earlier as impact investing. This is really purposeful investing looking for specific returns. And one of these examples is our diversification into our infrastructure fund. Axiom holds very strong ESG principles and has invested alongside with Indigenous communities on many clean energy projects in Canada and the US. And that's really the differentiator that we found here is partnering and investing with Axiom. We really saw that connection and respect of Indigenous communities that a lot of infrastructure funds typically wouldn't have out there. Even though they would have strong ESG principles, Axiom had those principles as well as had the principle of investing alongside with Indigenous communities. And so this is one of those examples of a project they've worked on a few years ago, Cape Scott Wood Farms, that was created and co-owned with 3 other First Nations in the area. We were also able to manage to identify opportunities in our bond portfolio to invest in First Nation Finance Authority with our bond manager, Leith Wheeler, investing in clean water, housing, infrastructure, and public-private partnerships. And then finally, in 2017, we decided to add value by driving change in the corporate governance. We decided to move from a negative screening strategy to positive screening strategies. And then through that process, the question naturally arose of, are we using our shareholder voting rights in a responsible and coherent manner? And also, are we impacting change through our investment behavior? And this is where we decided to vote in accordance to our value. We worked with SHARE, the Shareholders Association for Research and Education, to first review our fund managers' voting records. And through that process, we've identified that one of the fund managers mostly voted with management and really didn't take ESG into consideration through their voting process. And so based on those results, and also their lower performance, interesting link here of discounting ESG with performance, coming back into the process, we made the decision to release that investment manager. Once we've done that, we then focused on identifying our values and looking for a similar model in the market. Instead of recreating the wheel, there are different proxy voting guidelines that are out there. And so we looked into the market to see what's out there and what can we use. And we found some great models out there, but we found out that there were really no similar models to what we were looking for. And as such, we developed our own proxy voting guidelines, focusing on Indigenous rights, human and worker rights, climate change, sustainability, and then ESG disclosure. And then finally, we work closely with our fund manager to implement our voting guidelines, ensuring that we were voting our corporate shares in accordance to our own value. And this is 3 examples of our proxy voting guidelines that we've established. And so we are voting for reasonable proposals that ask companies to obtain and maintain free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. We vote for proposals requesting that companies support and follow the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We vote for proposals asking companies to assess and report on the adoption of policies related to free, prior, and informed consent. And so you might think, well, do these types of proposals really come through? And they do actually. We voted on a few proposals in 2020 that specifically addressed some of these functions. And in fact, we can already see the significance of voting in accordance to our values. In 2020, about 29% of our votes clearly followed a different path than our fund manager, Fiera, and they actually vote quite well and quite in line with ESG, but even with their ESG alignment, we've seen our specific values have shifted how we voted, which really shows the impact and the difference that your votes can have. Starting in 2020, our annual reports also include disclosure on, on our portfolio's environmental, social, and governance and Indigenous rights impact we've identified within each asset class. And finally, our proxy voting guidelines, were a pretty complex process to go through. We were lucky to work with Cher, with George and Bell, our investment advisor, and with Fiera, with our fund manager, to go through the process. There was a lot of work that went through to build it, and acknowledging that, we're just very, very happy to posted that investment guideline on our website. It's there for you to use. I believe the moderators will add the link to our proxy voting guidelines to the chat for you to be able to access it. Feel free to implement any sections you find relevant, and contact me if you have any questions along your journey. Again, we were lucky to have great advisors and fund managers to work with and support our journey along the way. And just a closing thought on this topic: enjoy the journey that you'll embark on. It's not an easy one. It will require lots of hard work, but remember that you're not alone through that process. Work with your fund managers, your advisors, other CTFs along the way, and allow them to support you through your journey. And feel great about contributing to a more sustainable and just world. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. That was amazing. I am very proud of seeing the progress that you have done in terms of aligning your mission with your investments. And I think wonderful examples we have heard today from both case studies in terms of how to actually put into practice our values. And when we talk about conservation trust funds and our values, a lot of it has to be related to the way in which we are doing our investments. So those were both great presentations and very timely. And unfortunately, because we do not have a lot of time and we do have a lot of questions, we will only have time to focus on 2 questions. And we have chosen these questions because they apply to all of us here. And some of them we have been answering, our panelists have been answering some of these questions, but we really want to start with Sean Nazzarelli's first question, which I think is very important that we discuss this, and it has to do with mission alignment, also having to do whether or not we invest in national or international investments. And Sean's point is, when we actually invest funds nationally, we can also create opportunities for investment capital to be used to promote and support green growth strategies in our countries. And his question is, do you think there is actually space for some kind of good practice recommendation of saying, in putting at least a percentage, 20% into local investments? And is this really an opportunity to further the missions that we're working with? So this question about whether investing nationally or internationally is something that always seems to be coming up. So I think it's worth approaching that question. And I would ask our panelists, and I would like to ask Natalia, if you would be able to answer that question, Natalia, from your perspective between national and international investments. And since you have been working with impact investment firms, if you could take on that first question from Sean first. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. We have been doing investments with our investment fund. It's a $2 million, it's a small investment fund. It's 100% oriented for investments in Colombia. I don't have an answer of a good practice on what proportion of the portfolio it should be. We went into this, it is an adventure. It was, we started when there was little impact investment in Colombia, especially it was concentrated in agriculture mostly, but not climate solutions or the other lines of investment, so responsible fashion, for example, or education, where we are moving mostly now, and alternative energy sources. But I think it's also sort of the ethical imperative. If we are able to make investments outside the country, why not? Of course, it has higher risks. It's probably going to get lower returns. One of your questions, Sean, was, have you been getting returns? Not yet. We are patient capital. We can wait for 7 to 10 years to get returns, but we are getting environmental and social returns. So yes, it is a difficult decision. I do believe you need to do it. It's a good practice to invest in the country, but you have to understand that your financial returns are going to probably be delayed and smaller. I can share with you our policy. We do have a policy that's specific for our investment in the investment fund here in Colombia.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the panel, Eddie or Viviana, that you would like to add to this specific question before we move on to the last question? No? Okay, then I will move on to the next question. Oh, sorry, Viviana, did you want to say something?
No, I just posted some comments, and I think Katie did as well. But just to mention that it would be in the end, I mean, a matter of defining internally what is your investment strategy, what kind of risk you can bear, and depending on also your investment goals and risk appetite. But the practice standards do not have a specific guidance on that. So it would be an internal process that would be, of course, constrained by legal regulations and constitutive documents and any other requirements, but in theory, it's something that can be done bearing all the considerations.
Okay, thank you, Viviana. And then the last question, we only have 4 more minutes, but it's from Manuel Enrique Rudin, and he says, if the return of the funds is not growing, people could move in other directions, like Bitcoins or more speculative investments. So how can we communicate the benefits, the long-term benefits of the conservation trust funds in capturing funds? And could we be thinking about other alternatives, for example, joining the work that we do with social economy, cooperatives, for example? And so other examples of how this is being done. And maybe, Eddie, would you like to approach that question?
Sorry, I'm having camera trouble for some reason, but I'll definitely speak to it. I think CTFs still have a very important place to play, in the conservation economy, as we see in our day-to-day work. I think probably Natalia can speak to that as well. It provides long-term sustainable funding to our grantees. So for us, that's the indigenous communities that we work with on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to the more fluid or really unsustainable or unpredictable funding. I mean, of the example of Bitcoins or of other areas that are presented here. Definitely the partnership with different organizations is an important one as we evolve and grow, because if we just stay static, we lose that evolution and in the market. However, I don't think CTFs are going anywhere in the near future.
Well, thank you very much.
Can I add?
Sorry, yes, please, Natalia. We still have 2 more minutes.
That's okay. I wanted to add that I think we've been doing well. Our endowment has grown. Our investment is growing. So I agree with Eddie. CTFs are a good solution. Of course, when you conduct these studies, you have data from all sorts of organizations and with different circumstances. But I would say I'll be happy to share the numbers with you. And we are believers on the length of CTFs and their basic financial mechanisms.
Well, thank you, Natalia and Eddie, for those answers. I think that we can conclude after these presentations that conservation trust funds also bring something else to the table. Besides investing these funds, they bring values and live by these values and abide by these values in the work that they do. And both the values that we live by as conservation trust funds and the investment strategies are both interrelated and linked. And we're very happy to see this reflected in the conservation standards, and very happy to see it reflected in the work that the conservation trust funds are actually doing out there in the field. So thank you for these wonderful examples we have received today. We have tried to answer all your questions. If not live, we have been answering them. The panelists have been answering them directly on the Q&A session. But also CFA has a discussion group on LinkedIn. So you can join us there after the webinar and you can answer the poll, and also we can continue some of this conversation in that LinkedIn page. And I very much look forward to seeing you all for the next webinar that we'll be hosting in approximately 1 month. And yeah, so the next one, the topic is, let me see, what is our next, yeah, technology. Wow, that's going to be a really interesting topic, definitely to bring to the table, and a new conservation standard that we have been working on. So please join us on July 20th for our next webinar session on technology. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be in touch with all of you shortly with announcements on the upcoming webinars. Thank you. Goodbye.